Gary, can you see the main title slide?
Yes.
All right, over to you.
Okay. This presentation, if you have questions while I'm going through the slides, you don't have to wait till the end. Just ask as I go along, and I can answer them rather than go back and wait till the very end of the first session. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, today we're going to go through the process of scratch building a building. This one happens to be a machine shop, and it's in 5 phases. The first phase is the exterior walls and roof structure. Phase 2 will be the front doors and roof construction. Phase 3 is finishing interior and exterior walls. 4 is finishing windows and roof completion. And then phase 5 is just showcasing the finished building. This building is one of 3 on my layout. The first one was a large engine house done with the same material. And the one you're going to see today is the machine shop. It's the smallest of the 3. So we go to the next slide, Paul, please. Okay, we're going to learn how to I'm sorry, going to work with plaster casting building structure. Join the plaster castings to complete the walls. Build and attach roof trusses. Work with wood to produce doors and windows. Make cardstock shingles. And paint brick and stone using paint stains and pastels. Next slide. Okay, phase 1, exterior walls and roof structure. Next slide. Okay. Now, these are the 3 pieces, or actually 3 main pieces and 2 front pieces that make up the building. And they are castings that, quite a long time ago, it would be more than 20 years ago, a friend of mine, we got together and we made these molds from a kit that he had obtained. And we made quite a few of them. So what I have done is I've taken 3 of the walls. You can see the top wall on the left is a full casting. And the other walls to the right, top and bottom, are the end pieces are missing. And you'll see how that comes together later on. And then the other 2 small pieces I'm using for the main entrance to the building. So the castings were, the original casting was taken and a latex mold made from it. And then all we did was we just produced these over and over and over again. And we ended up with quite a few of them. Next, please. Now, when you take the castings, one of the things you want to make sure is that the castings are square. So you want to take a square, check the corners, and you want to make sure the bottom is squared, and also you want to make sure that the top, and this can be done by with sandpaper and light sanding to get everything square. And then when you're joining the walls, you have to work on the back part of the wall and do some engraving. As you can see here, what I've done is I worked on the raw plaster and scribed out lines and then made the duplication from the front wall to the back wall of the brickwork. And this doesn't have to be precise, but it, as you'll see later on, it does add to the walls when they come together. Next slide. So as you can see, we've attached the walls here. And when you attach the wall, you can see that the brick part of the wall sitting on the stone is reliefed in. And by putting the scribe brickwork on the back side of that mold, it actually blends into the brickwork. You can see here on the left, the one wall is attached, and all that brickwork that you had scribed on the back side now blends in so that the walls are a continuous set of bricks. Next slide. So what I've done here is I've put the 3 walls together. They were put together with crazy glue, St. Lanolin black glue, and everything was measured up, made sure it was level. The side walls, you can see, the front walls where the doorway is going to sit. Those have been placed in, and I put a wooden support beam across the front, which will hold the structure together, and also hold the front doors and all that in when things are placed there. Next slide. Okay, just showing you another. You can see the building has been glued. The corners have all come together. Now you can see a line in the corner where the walls have met. And what we're going to do next is we're going to eliminate those lines. Next slide. So what I've done is I've made a little slurry of plaster, and I use dental plaster. And I just sculpted into the join marks, as you can see. And then what I'll do next is take that, once that has dried, I go in there and I start carving away and blending it all in so it matches with the brickwork and the stonework on the building. Next slide. You can see here the plaster is starting to set up, and things have come together. Next slide. Now what I've done is I've started, you can see I've done some of the carving. If you look down on the left-hand side of the stonework, that's all been blended in. And the brickwork itself above that has started to blend in and get carved. And the same on the right side, stonework has been blended, and the brick walls have been carved and blended in. It doesn't take too long. It's just take patience. You can see here on the left-hand side where I've done the carving and removing of the plaster. When you're putting this plaster on, you want a very, very thin sheet of plaster. You don't want to put it on too heavy because you've got to carve this away and blend those walls in so they look like they're one continuous construction. Next slide. So what I did was I took the building and measured it out, and I went a 1 foot on either side of the width of the building. to figure out my trusses. Now, when you're working with your truss, you can go in, there's a number of trusses you can get. This one here happens to be a Fink truss. And when I measured out the building, we take measurements of the width of the building, design the size of the truss to be slightly wider. And I've determined I'm going to need 7 trusses to cut the material. Now, 7 trusses isn't very much. Then I designed the truss to scale, put it on a sheet of paper, as you can see, and determined that I needed 14 top pieces, 7 bottom pieces, 14 short interior pieces. And that's the long ones, and then the 14 long interior pieces, which are the ones inside the outside of the trusses. So I needed 7 of them. So what I did was I went to my metal jig. Next slide, please. Well, I'm sorry. First of all, I cut out all the material, and you can see it here. And these are eventually going to end up as trusses. Next slide. So what I did was I have a metal jig, which is actually the bottom out of a old computer. It makes a perfect rectangular jig. And I put the paper on the bottom of it. And then I took the round magnets and positioned them into the positions that you see. And because I was only making 7, which is not a lot, I used this method. And I just lay in the strips of material and end up with the trusses. Next slide. And as you can see, the magnets used as the jig is to hold the framing in place. So I get a bit of a consistency when I'm doing the trusses. Next slide. Okay, after the trusses were made, I then sanded them on both sides to get a nice smooth finish and a nice joint finish to make them look like there's no gaps or anything in them. Now, when I find a big gap, what I do is I put a little bit of yellow carpenter's glue into the opening, and then just do a little bit of sanding, and this closes the opening. Makes it look like it's a nice tight fit. Okay, then I set up the jig to do the roof, start building the roof and doing the spacing evenly from front to back. And you can see the method here using that metal jig again and the round magnets and the box magnets. Everything is put together, made sure it's square and at 90-degree angles. Next slide. And I put on supports to hold everything together and in place. These are just glued on with yellow carpenter's glue. Next. You see again a couple strips on the very top, which is going to hold the roofing in place. Slide. Again, just showing the roof from underneath. And then fitting the roof or placing it on top of the building to make sure everything is fits properly. Now the spacing at the front, you can see the structure itself that's sitting on the building actually moves forward. And there is a slight gap, as you'll see later on, at the very front. And once I was satisfied with the way the roof sat on there, I proceeded to the next step, which is phase 2. So if you'd like to take a little break here for a second, we can pause for a second. Any questions?
I just have a question about all the scribing. Did you use a jig for the scribing for the bricks, or how did you do it? Just freehand?
Okay, the molds, like when they the sides of the building come out of the molds, the brickwork is already there because you've taken a mold of the original. When you put it together and you join the corner, you very lightly make up a mixture of plaster, very, very thin, and you feed that into the corners. Not like, you want to be very careful. You don't want to put a lot of plaster in there because you have to do carving. So once that dries, it's put into the corners near where the stone and brickwork is. You take a X-Acto knife and you very carefully follow the lines of the brickwork from the casting and go into where you put the plaster and start scribing those lines. And then you basically, what you're doing is you're scribing in the mortar lines so that when the two pieces come together and you look at them, you don't see a line going down. It's actually the brickwork starts to form into each other. I don't know if that helps you or not.
Yes, that does. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Gary, what tool did you use to do the scribing?
I used an X-Acto knife. You can also use dentist picks, which I have. Anything with a sharp edge. And the reason I like the X-Acto knife, it's got a very fine point, and you have to be careful that you're not taking away too much of the plaster that you've added, because you want it to look like mortar lines and brick above it and below
Just
it.
to clarify, it's not the knife. You're using a number 11 blade.
That's a number 11 blade, yes.
And where do you buy your dental plaster?
I used to be in forensics, and I had quite a supply of it from work.
Where would the
Now,
rest of us get it? Since
I think
most of us aren't in forensics.
yeah, go to your dentist, and I'm sure if you have a good rapport with your dentist, he will either supply it to you or order it for you and get it in for you. But I'm also assuming that any dental supply outfit would have it also.
The problem is the quantity, and I can share with everyone that that's what I was able to do a few years ago. Is my dentist sold me about 5 pounds.
Yes, yeah. Like, as I say, I had a 20-pound bag, so I have a lot of it.
Your dentist may also be a source of dental tools. My dentist gave me a bunch, and the reason is that they get dropped on the floor, and so they lose the really, really sharp point that they like when they're, for example, removing a tartar from around our teeth and gums. But they will sharpen up again, and they're certainly quite adequate for the sorts of modeling application where we don't have to worry about picking nerve endings.
That's
Any other
good.
questions for Gary? Okay, Gary, I'll mute myself again then. Are you ready to carry on?
Sure. Hey, part 2, what we're going to work on are the front doors and the roof construction. Going to work a little more with the roof. So next slide. Okay, what I did was, once the building was together, I was able to do the measurements of the front opening that you'd seen in the building where the main door is going to go. Now, the main doors are very large, and the reason for that was large diesel engines were going to go inside, and they needed that large opening to get them in there. So I measured it all up, figured out the material that I needed. As you can see, it's cut out there. They're on the right side are the flat boards. The door opening was 20 feet by 16 feet, HO scale. So taking those measurements, I had a rough idea of by measuring the door open and then figuring out the material and framing that I was going to need to do that. So next slide. So what I had done was I had taken that material, done a large frame. These are 12 by 12s, HO scale, and then designing the two doors. Now, when I designed the front doors, started building them, both doors, the door on the left and the door on the right were the same at the time I built them. And I looked at them and I thought, well, how are the people going to get into the building? So what I figured I'd do is add a little door to the door on the right, so people could open that door without opening the big doors and letting all the heat out. And I decided to put that little door in, and I was kind of glad I did because it looks kind of nice. And I've seen it in prototypical doors of that size before. So then next slide, please. Okay, just another shot of the door. Now, when it was originally built, same thing. I put the door all together. Those in behind the framing are flat sheets of wood, and then everything was sanded. And again, when you come across a gap in the doors where they join, just a little bit of carpenter's glue and a lot of sanding, and it makes everything nice and smooth. Fits together quite well. Next slide. There you can see the doors. They're working doors. They actually open and close. And to do that, if you look at the very top support beam, you'll see little holes drilled into the top. And what that did was the doors were placed in position, and a drill little hole all the way through the both pieces of the framing down into the top of the door, and then a metal pin was slid down in, and the same thing on the bottom, and that made the doors operational. So they do open and close. Next slide. There they are in position. If you look at the top of the gap that's there, you can see the pins projecting down through the top, and the door frame has now been placed into the position that it will sit once it's finished. Also, the gentleman was talking before, if you look over to the left and right of those short sections that were joined to the wall, you can see where the plaster has been carved, and then the joints come together and make it a solid wall. Same within the stonework. You can see where the plaster's been added just from the discoloration of the dental plaster that was used. Next slide. So there's the doors in place. As you can see, they are working, slightly opened. The gaps in the top and that when the doors are closed and everything was finished, they come together. There's a slight gap, but it's pretty acceptable. Next slide. So then the roof was attached, and you can see what I'd done with the roof. I'd put the roof on, and then I'd taken a drill and drilled through the trusses and positioned it in and stuck a pin down into the framework so that the roof would sit on there permanently. But as the building progressed, and a friend of mine, Mr. Pat Rivard, talked me into lighting the building, putting lights in it. So those pins in the final building were eliminated because the roof had to be designed so that it was detachable, which you'll see later on in the progress of the structure. Next slide. So what I did for the roof, I don't like to use cardboard for my roofs, so I use a very thin scribe sheet. And this sheet here that I had, as you can see, it's scribed, and it's a very fine scribing that was in it. It's more N scale than HO. So what I had done was I had measured out the surface of the roof and cut out these two pieces. Next slide. Hopefully it's the right one. Yes. And what I did was I measured out, as you can see by the dots on the left-hand side, the width of the boards that I wanted to use. I think they're every foot. I'm not quite sure, but it was either 10 inches or 1 foot. And then I took a pencil and scribed all the way down with the pencil just to highlight the lines and the width of the boards. Next slide. So finished up both of them and then took those on the next slide and then started to attach them to the roof. Now, when you attach them to the roof, make sure that you have they go on square, good overhang evenly on each end, and at the bottom where they come even with the bottom. Next slide. As you can see here, a little bit of a difference, but it can be sanded out. So that was glued on using the carpenter's glue and a lot of weight, and let it dry thoroughly before going on to any further steps with it. And as you can see, it's on, and then the scribe lines just give it a little bit of a highlight, highlighting the boards. Next slide. Okay, what I do for the shingles, these are slate shingles on this roof, and I use these pruning shears. I have, you can see the two of them here. The silver one is quite large, and the other one is about 3/4 the size of the silver one. So I use these, and I take, next slide. I take file paper, or I'm sorry, file folders that are discarded and measure them out. And then I start pruning with those pruning scissors to make my shingles. Next slide. And as you see, it's a long process to put these on. And this is a small roof. This isn't a large roof. So what I do is I lay the first course down, which is slightly overhanging the end of the roof. so that when you look underneath, you can just see the tips of the first course that goes down. And I start laying the second course so that the tips interline with the valleys of the first course. And that is just repeated over and over and over again. And you have to do a little bit of fitting and shifting of the stock. That's why I make it long, so that I can shift it back and forth, as you can see from the ends. And then I just keep on proceeding up. And they're glued on with a little bit of carpenter's glue on the back of the cardstock. And you just keep on going till it's finished. Next slide. And then once you've finished it, you cut off with a pair of scissors the edges that are overhung. And then I put the same material cap on the top of the roof. Now, so and what that did is it gives you a nice slate roof. I've done this on a lot of my buildings, this method. Next slide. So with the roof shingles all on, I start with the end pieces. And being this a smaller roof, on the larger building I've done, it was a steel slate or sided roof. But this was small enough that I could do individual boards. And I started in the center and worked my way to the right, and then worked my way to the left, completing the closure, just to give it a nice wooden end to the roof and trusses. Now, don't worry about the length on the bottom, because remember, this sits on the roof and it will hang down, and it adds a little character to the finished product, as you'll see later. And there's the finished piece. Now I have sanded off, as you can see, some of the boards. They're the majority of them are fairly even, and some were left short on purpose. And those short ones will be distressed later. And by distressed, I mean just a little bit of chopping with a X-Acto blade, number 11. And just they're basically showing that the bottom of the boards are starting to rot away. Next slide. You can see here some of the gaps left. Next slide. And there's the finished product. You can see on the right-hand side along the front rafter, the distressed siding on the bottom. And then what I did was to fill in the gap, or I guess you'd call it the overhang or sash, on the bottom. Once it fits onto the roof, the building fits in. You see a long board that closes everything up on the sides of the top and bottom there. Next slide. Okay, that ends phase 2. Any questions?
Any questions for anyone? Doesn't look like it, Gary.
Okay, can we take a break here, Paul, please?
Absolutely. We'll take a short bio break, shall we say 5 minutes?
That'd be great.
And I'm going to stop the recording so it's in two parts and will be easier to email to everyone.